Hello and welcome to Design Dispatches, where today I'm delighted to say I'm going to talk to Asif Khan, one of the most preeminent architects of his generation anywhere in the world, who's a trustee of the Design Museum, has been rewarded with an MBE for services to architecture, whose rise to prominence, I think you could say, without fear of cliche, has been meteoric. He set up his practice in 2007, and over the ensuing 13 years, he's designed pavilions at 2 Winter Olympics, London 2012, a Serpentine House. He's one of the major architects in the new Museum of London, scheduled to open in 2024. He's working on a museum of culture in Kazakhstan, and he's worked across the field of architecture in installation, exhibition, as well as building a digital and spatial transformation. Asif, welcome. It was clearly a sort of breathtaking career trajectory to date. But where did it begin? When did you actually realize you wanted to be an architect?
Wow. Well, thank you for that amazing introduction, Tim. It sounds like you're talking about someone else. I came to architecture quite late, when I was about 18, 19. I originally wanted to do something in science, maybe medicine. I went and did my interviews for medical school. And then friends of mine were getting into architecture, and I realized that they discovered a subject that combined everything, from art to sort of social sciences. It was something which incorporated science, engineering, across the whole field of human behavior, but also material behavior and the way that things work in the world. And that kind of encompassed everything that I was interested in. And then it seemed natural from then on. But actually, if I look back, there were experiences as a child, which I think switched me on to design. One of them was just one of my aunts had a fantastic collection of Danish design. We didn't go that often to their house, but when we went, I was fascinated by these pieces of furniture, and the Paul Care home nesting table, which used to have, which you would just sit and stare at and take apart and put back together. And it's made using tiny 5mm rods of steel. And, it's just something sublime. And, we had heavy pine furniture, completely different stuff. And it meant that I think that stuff stays in your head. And it just works at your brain. And it's somehow the design kind of, or aesthetic languages and so on. I felt that, my mind had, certainly in university choices and so on, I felt that I was not going to be able to use that part of my mind in kind of creativity and aesthetics and so on. I kind of eventually realized and stuck my neck out and did what I wanted to do.
You went to the Bartlett and then the AA. I can think of various luminaries who may have had direct and indirect impact on you, but which architects had the most impact on you as you were finding your own voice, your own approaches? Wow.
So it's a very difficult question to ask an architect to reveal his sources.
But, yeah, no, of course. Well, that's the point.
But I have enormous respect. I have respect for a lot of different people, and I think I had different times of studying. You kind of gravitate towards let's say different mentors. And so when I was before the Bartlett, I did a foundation course at the Prince's Foundation. So then I was, it's Christopher Alexander, who's talking about the city and kind of how to make places and connect sort of the human side of the what can often be a harsh environment, and then at the Bartlett, I think probably Sverre Fehn had the biggest influence on me. Like it was sort of, I'd say that a lot of Danish, Sverre Fehn and he's Norwegian, and then Jacobsen and who else? Started to kind of look into the Japanese architects, became aware of like Tange's work, all this, the metabolists, and some Finnish architects. The work of Tapio Workala, so who's a designer. So started to understand the relationship between the making of things and the human hand, the importance of craft, making of spaces. And then at the AA, it was a complete shift to understanding about the world of computation and digital sort of digital design. So I think there I got switched on to Zaha's work, and she is probably the brightest star of the AA, and kind of new techniques of making. So whereas at the Printers Foundation, I wanted to know how to make a brick, and I wanted to know how to cut wood by hand and Japanese joinery and all that kind of stuff. And at the AA, I was kind of this new world opened up that was about using the computer and connecting with technology, which then connected back to my early interest as a child in science and research, let's say.
Research actually is often cited in descriptions of you, and I think partly the way you describe your own practice, which is that it's rooted in the idea of research. You can understand from just talking to you briefly, there's a multiplicity of influences and inspirations and things that excite. And I suppose at its best, architecture is so collaborative, it's so expansive, it's so open to and needs to be open to context, client, and so on. Did you find your own singular approach? Do you feel there's a core that you established in the way you approach things, or are you very fluid in the way you approach every single commission or challenge? It's a difficult question to ask an individual because often it's from the outside. I mean, I have certain views about what defines your architecture, but I'd like to know whether you see things that are kind of constants.
Well, first of all, we're a team, and there's a team that's in the studio which work together very closely, and over the years that's changed who's in that, and that has a big influence on how you resolve design questions. And then the client and the kind of other people involved in the project are the other part of the team. And I think I've been very open through the years to listening and trying to sort of diagnose the project, to understand the brief, but then to find what's beyond it, what's driving it, and then not to be afraid to question it. It's kind of like it's a cliche, but I'd say the other side of it is I've tried to make the project personal always. The only value you can really bring as a designer is yourself, and you're the thing that makes what you do unique. And that's been reinforced by artists I've talked to since. And so what I tried to do is to look inside really, and to make this process, or this path that I'm on, to make it a process of learning more about myself and developing myself through the projects. And it's not to say that it's a selfish act. It's that it's a collaborative act where the client evolves and you evolve, and you do that together. And through that process, synergy happens, something new happens that can't happen when you're apart. And maybe that's like a kind of an orchestra playing in a new hall, or conductor, composer conducting a new orchestra with their own piece of music. Like this is something that changes, that you can't do by yourself. And that's something magical. You never know what it's going to be when you start out a project. My table at the moment here is just full of folded pieces of paper, which are eventually going to evolve into a scheme for a competition in 24 hours time. But
show us.
It's a mess. It's a bit of a mess. It's just these lots of folded paper.
I love an architect's definition of a mess. If you want the definition of a mess, have a look around this place. I tell you, this is an historian's and a museum director's definition of a mess. Yours is gridded, folded sheets of paper. Yeah. Anyway, but is that lockdown evolved approach, or is that your approach always? That there's pieces of paper, there's grids, you're very hands-on. I'm curious about your process of approaching.
It's a lot of drawing, a lot of making, lots of U-turns. It's almost like there's it's a kind of archaeology, right? Like I'm digging through my own through myself, and putting things together. Of course, there's a feeling of, there's a direction. I mean, this project here is about it's a sort of it's a art space relating to fashion and drapery, and I'm trying to understand the relationship between surface and pattern making and gravity and those kind of basic things. I'm using paper as a way of doing that. Sometimes, you know, I'll pick up. This is my lockdown sketches. So this is May and June. These are all the May and June sketches. So I do, you know, some of them are just rubbish, right? You know, but they just get you thinking about things. And then I'll do a bit of that, and I'll switch to another medium. And then in the studio, which I'm not in at the moment, we have quite a big making space for making full-scale mock-ups of things. We've got all the machinery and so on. We also have an area where we work on computers, an area where we can do sort of simple, small, like tiny scale with like millions of tweezers that we have for picking up those little figures of people, you know, 1 to 500 scale people and all that. And I find jumping through the scales, it's a way of forcing different constraints on your mind, and out comes like a different answer each time. So it's this exercise. It's an exercise which I think is a tool I use, a kind of mental exercise and physical exercise to get out the answers. And I throw a lot of stuff away. Like it's 90%. I shouldn't say that to the client, shouldn't know that, but it's but you know, you go through a lot of you ask yourselves a lot of questions through this creative process. What's nice about it is it doesn't really require much. You know, you can do a lot of that sort of 10% at the beginning of a project. You just need yourself and a table and a pencil and some paper, you know, really, and you can get through a lot. And you probably need a person to bounce some ideas off. But the other 90% of getting a building done or getting a design built or made is a bit that you need a team for, and maybe a factory, and you need a site, and you need all of this. You need money, you know, you need all of that. But and of course, the design is a continuous process as well. So a lot of it changes through the process of building something. You know, you're on the building site with your pencil, still the same pencil, and correcting things as you go on, and that's also part of the pleasure.
I'm fascinated by the idea of failure in process and how we learn from when things go wrong. And obviously, the stakes are much higher when you're on a site. But I'm interested in that 10% of those sketches you've just shown me that over the last 2 months. Do they range in terms of kind of abstraction to particular things to either from things that you're definitely working on, or just ideas you have about shape or form or a solution to something? I mean, are they all specific to particular projects, or are they completely lateral thinking?
They're mostly specific to projects, but there'll be moments where I'll get distracted, and so then I'll have a lateral thought about something else, and it will be on the same sheet of paper. So I haven't prepared this, so it's not, like, you know, I don't know what that is. I don't remember. I think that is something to do with that. That's something to do with that. Which this is for a building. This is something else. But that might be useful later. That's just something I was doing when I was on the phone on a Zoom call. But that also might be something, you know. And then sometimes it's words. So, you know, bits of, you know, you get these. This is something from Museum of London, I think. Just says, you know, there'll be notes and Burlington Arcade, or, you know, whatever, different times of meetings and things. And so what's quite helpful, and I don't have enough time to do all this, is to go back over things. And then when you go back over them, it's like it's like you're in a crime scene. You're trying to understand what what was the idea here. And actually, by putting things together in a different way, another idea emerges, which you keep in the vault somewhere for the future. But that's a challenge, archiving, and then in the digital world now, I think we failed enormously. I think all of us at archiving our digital information. It's a lot easier when we can physicalize it, but there's so much work is going on at the moment on the computer that only has an endpoint. The process is not really recorded. It's just like an email stream, which you can't really get into.
You talk about physicalizing, and actually one characteristic I think of your architecture is that kind of sensitivity to the way people exist in or inhabit space. And forgive me for my reductive linking, but I was really interested in the fact that you thought about medicine to begin with. And you can see where I'm going with this now, as someone who is interested in the body and healing and so on. But do you think there is a kind of connectedness to your interest in the human body and how it functions and architecture, or is that is so general as to be meaningless?
No, I think it's there are enough architects who want to be medics and enough medics who want to be architects for that to be a genuine link. I think. I think there's a few different ways. One is the obvious that the body is a landscape, and the relationship between skin and clothing is similar to the body. It's a kind of long held relationship in architectural theory. So the building itself is another piece of clothing in a way for the body. But there's something about I think you're going to go somewhere else with this and talk about inner space and the kind of cavities inside the body. But there's actually, there is a movie. Dennis Quaid is in this movie, fantastic late '80s movie called Inner Space, which is about a voyage inside the body. And of course, there's an early 1960s version of that, which I've forgotten the name of. And these were things I watched on TV, and they do make you feel there's a world to explore, even in minutiae. With a microscope, you can go in and discover architecture. And 2 years ago, I was teaching I had the great privilege to teach with Kenya Hara at Musabi University in Tokyo. And I did a course about, it's a course for students who weren't architects, but they were general art students. And I had like 100 students, and we gave them just these figures of small people, from like 1 to 500, which I think a person is like 2 millimeters high, up to I think 1 to 10, where they are 1/10 of our height. And just to place those little people into environments. So some of them put them like on a piece of sweet corn. One person put them into a bubble, a soap bubble, like a little person soap bubble. And so the soap bubble cut around the neck of the little person. Another person put them inside a world of broccoli. And, like if you go right into broccoli, it's like a forest. It's beautiful. And so this idea of changing your relationship environment, seeing things in a different way, is actually a creative. It's a creative release, actually, just to change your point of view and to change the way you see things around you, because we see things in such a let's say we've been seeing for so long, we don't really question what we're seeing. We see from birth. So I like to explore that a bit and play games with that, just to using scale to change our relationship with the world around us. And design processes itself should be shaken up as well, because otherwise it can be quite linear. So where was I going with that? Medicine medicine is about is linear, because you're trying to save people. Architecture can be linear because you're trying to cover an environment and put shelter over people. But there's an aspect of it which doesn't have to be linear, and which can be about creativity and creating new sensations, new experiences of life, socially, visually, through senses. And that's what's brilliant about, and that's the whole of design allows for that. So I think if we're designing and we're not taking the opportunity to expand who we are as human beings, or what our experience of the world can be, I think we're missing a trick. So that's what I try to kind of explore and communicate in every project.
And also in your teaching, you mentioned you were teaching.
Yeah. I think the students come up with things you could never imagine. Like they're so creative, and actually I find that they become, the more specialized they become, the less creative they are. And so what we try to do is to sort of de-specialize them. And I think they have actually in the Musabi University, they have a very interesting idea of a de-specialized department of design. It's called the Science of Design. And it's not, here we would call it a foundation. And foundation implies like you're a beginner, you don't know anything. Their Science of Design it's a broad, it looks across all design fields, but it doesn't treat the participants in that department as beginners. It allows them to be at the same level as experts in a way. I think it's a very different approach. So what hopefully comes out of that is are new ideas. They don't get lost in the ideas which grow from the bottom up in a way, and it's not so much about let's say tutors imparting their kind of twist on the world. What they're trying to do is extract from the individual what they think the world should be like.
That's very interesting, and it implies that emerging generations of architects have a chance to make fundamental differences. But one of the observations that's been levelled at many aspects of British cultural life, but I think you'd say Western cultural life, is its lack of diversity. And I think architecture and design particularly are susceptible to that, or have been afflicted by that lack of diversity. I wonder if you see a kind of sea change coming in the students that you're teaching, or whether there are still major institutional and societal issues that architecture and design have got to get over.
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic, and diversity in all aspects of the word is important. And if you imagine that, like the city, it would make sense if I said the city should reflect the people who live within it, right? So how the city functions, what it looks like, should somehow resemble us in order for it to be right for us, because it's basically our product in a way. We're meant to be able to do our best things in this city. But if you found out that city is made mostly by, let's say, quite privileged people, who could afford to do the 5 years at university, and so from a particular background, maybe particular gender, sort of, and traditionally, let's say, mostly male, mostly white, mostly middle class. It would sort of explain why the city is often in conflict with our needs, right? Like they say, the broader needs across the whole spectrum of its citizens. So to try and broaden that church, and I think, firstly, who goes to university, who's able to get there? There are barriers. And secondly, who goes into practice and who becomes leaders in the profession? These are both really important things, like to have role models, and also for, let's say, a wider variety of potential candidates for university, for architecture school, or for even for art A-level, seeing a road ahead of them, seeing that their interest is valid, and the parents understanding that that's a valid interest, as opposed to, say, accounting or medicine, or maybe not university at all. So I think these are really important. So we've got to kind of do it in a few ways. Popularizing design and the creative industry is so important, showing that it has commercial value, and that it's a sort of driver for the UK economy and so on. That's really important. So the parents know it's valuable, and the teachers then market it not as a sort of as a continuation of the D&T course, but as a subject which crosses every single subject. But then at the same time, we need to offer more open days. We need to, the architecture offices and design offices in London should do more engagement with sixth form colleges and even primary schools. Like we should be going, and the kids, I know, luckily my kids, the local primary school, Chisenhale, did an architecture project where they were asked to make models of London landmarks, which is fantastic. And we designed a school playground for the school. So
I know it, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a really fun thing. There was an engagement, and the kids got to think about their space in a new way. We got them all to draw what they thought a playground should be. And, you know, some of the ideas were insane. Like we would never, you know, they all wanted slides connecting all the classrooms, and, you know, actually great ideas. Like, and unfortunately, it's only like media offices, advertising offices that do that, and schools aren't allowed to do it, weirdly. They should be. But I think that sort of program should be on the national curriculum. You know, engagement in design, think about your environment, having fun with it, changing your room, you know, all of these sort of things. And it shouldn't be just in the world of D&T. You know, those sort of steps, and then the kind of inclusion on juries, inclusion at the kind of level of city planning, you know, it has to be more diverse. And I think then we'll see the city will change, and it will feel different to be in it because we'll feel more welcome. And we, meaning all of us, will feel more welcome. You know, whichever I think background you come from. So I think that this, you know, design, architecture aren't the only fields. You talk broadly about the arts, fashion, filmmaking. You know, it needs to happen everywhere, really.
It does, and I like the fact you say it's a collective responsibility, and you're right. And I really like the way you say that although it's a bigger issue that needs careful thought, you can start to make a difference in certain ways immediately. There's also, you were polite enough not to say, a responsibility for a design museum to get involved in that. And there's a huge responsibility for that museum, of which I'm the director and you're a trustee. We've got a lot of work to do in that regard.
I think we're doing quite a good job. There's more that we can do, and the more that we can expand, the breadth, the wider we can expand our sort of interest group, let's say, you know, and make it relevant, make design relevant to everyone. The more they'll want to come and sort of touch base with us and learn more. And I just think we're really at the beginning. Like design, although the V&A is a design museum and so on, the modern design museum, you know, has only been around, like what 1989, the design museum was founded.
31 years.
Yeah, I mean, so we're really at the beginning of this subject, you know, and beginning of it as a cause and as something that's relevant to people's lives. And we carry around, you know, iPhones and, you know, wear interesting clothing and so on. All of these things have been designed. And I don't think people have yet connected the dots between the world that they live in and the sort of and the curriculum that they study at school, and that they can actually play a part in shaping the world, you know, in physical, tangible ways, from being a youngster. And I think that's a role that we can, as a museum, we can kind of introduce people to.
Much to do, challenges, but let's hope we get through the current crisis and then on we go. Asif, this is a conversation to be continued, not just in private, but in public. But thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Thank you. Bye-bye.